One of the biggest ways that football boots separate themselves from one another is their upper. And whether you want a thin synthetic, a stretchy knit material, or natural leather, there is a ton of variety out there to choose from on the market. And I've tried on dozens of football boots over the past year, so in this video, I'm gonna go over 10 of the best uppers that you can currently get. And after the video, if you're interested in any of the boots that we discussed, you can find links to them on sale with discount codes in the description below. Let's get into it, starting with our first boot, the Nike Tiempo Legend 10. Now, the Tiempo is a really iconic series from Nike, and traditionally, this football boot was always made with natural leather. And that's why it was a little bit controversial when last year Nike came out with the new Legend 10, because for the very first time, instead of having that leather material, it's actually going to be a full synthetic. And while I was a little bit hesitant when I first got my pair of the new Legend 10s about how the new upper was going to feel, honestly, I think Nike really nailed it with the new Fly Touch Pro. You've seen a few different companies in the shoe and football boot world recently come out with faux leather materials, and sometimes it feels like they almost don't even try to mimic the comfort, look, or feel of actual leather. They really just have some glossy synthetic material they think can kind of pass as leather, and they just put that in the boots. But I think whoever designed the new Fly Touch material at Nike took a little bit of time and care to make sure that it kind of looks like real leather, but more importantly, that it has a similar softness to it. And while it's true with the synthetic that's in the new Tiempo Legend 10, both the Elite version and the Pro version, you're not going to get the same stretch over time that you would get from a natural leather football boot, but that being said, the softness and overall comfort is definitely there. I think the standard version of the Legend 10 looks pretty good, but if you can, I would recommend trying to find the Emerald versions, which I think look absolutely beautiful. You get this amazing diamond crosshatch pattern, and I definitely think it's one of the best looking Tiempos we've seen in quite a few years. And as far as value for the Tiempo Legend 10, the Elite is going to be a great boot, and it retails for a little over $200, but in my opinion, I'd recommend going with the Legend 10 Pro instead. It has almost all of the same features as the Elite model, including an almost identical upper, and it retails for about $100 less. Now, before we move on, I just want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, BetterHelp. Now, as footballers, we obviously focus a lot on our physical health and fitness, but it's important to remember that our mental health is equally important. And both on and off the field, between your time at work, school, or at home, everyone's life can get pretty hectic. And reaching out to talk to someone can be a great way to get additional support. And that is where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp is an online therapy platform that makes it easy for you to get the mental health support you need on your own terms. With BetterHelp, you can connect to a licensed therapist in the comfort of your own home through either video chats, phone calls, or messaging. And they have a network of over 30,000 therapists, so you can find the best fit for you. And if you're not satisfied with your therapist, you can switch at any time for no extra cost. So if you are struggling with your mental health, or you just need a little extra support, I highly recommend giving BetterHelp a try. Go to betterhelp.com/upper90football or select Upper 90 Football at sign up for a special discount off your first month of therapy. Guys, your mental health is worth prioritizing, and BetterHelp is going to make it easy to do just that. Now let's get back into the video. Now next up, we are going over to New Balance with the Tekela V4 Plus. Now, New Balance has three really great top-end football boots with the 442, the Tekela, and the Furon. But in the context of uppers, if I were to choose what I think was the best of those three, I have to go with the Tekela. And not only is the Hypoknit upper on the Tekela V4 is great, but I also think that the Tekela is maybe the most well-rounded boot that New Balance makes. And as far as mainstream brands go, I would probably say that New Balance is also the most underrated out there. Now, the majority of the upper on the Tekela is going to be a soft synthetic, and it does have a very slick matte finish to it. Personally, I kind of like when uppers have more of a matte finish because it means when you're dribbling, you don't always get the ball sticking under your feet, especially when you first get the boots out of the box and they have that coating on them. But while I mentioned that the upper on the Tekelas is pretty slick and has that matte finish, it does have some textural elements on the side of the boots that can give you a little bit more grip on the ball on your shots. And then running through the center, just underneath the lacing system of the Tekelas, you're going to have this really stretchy knit material that has a good thickness to it and is overall just really well executed on. And as far as the overall shape of the boot, this is another area where I feel like New Balance really excels, not just with the Tekela, but all of their models, because this boot has a nice wide toe box. These days, you can see a lot of modern football boots come to a really aggressive point at the end of the boots, and for players with average and slightly wider feet, that can be pretty uncomfortable, and I think New Balance is one of the brands that has a slightly more accommodating fit throughout the length of the boots. So if you do have wider feet, this is definitely going to be one to check out. Next up, we've got the Puma Future 7. Now, if you've never tried on any boot from the Puma Future series before, the best way to describe it is really a sock-like experience. And I think in many ways, Puma kind of popularized the idea of a fully knit upper when it comes to football boots. And while there are a lot of boots that have some knit material running underneath the lacing system and maybe a little bit around the collar, generally with the Puma Futures, I would say that they're almost 60 to 70% just that stretchy knit material. And honestly, I don't necessarily think that these boots are going to be for everyone. Some players are going to really like how they feel on feet, and others may feel that they don't quite have enough structure to them. With the Futures, it's a little bit of a trade-off when it comes to the upper because that knit material is extremely stretchy and it feels so comfortable on feet, but because there is so much of it and it goes all the way through the lacing system, the ankle, and the heel area, because they use that material, you do sacrifice a little bit of lockdown from the performance aspect. But if you get the laces just right around the ankle and make sure that they're tight enough, usually I didn't notice it was too much of a problem. So if the idea of a sock-like football boot sounds like it would be appealing to you, then I would definitely recommend checking out the Futures. Also, similar with the Tiempo from Nike, I've always found that the Pro version of the Puma Futures seems to do the job, and you don't always need to spend the extra money to get the Ultimates. Next up, we've got one other boot from Nike I wanted to touch on, and that's the Phantom GX2. Now, the Phantom GX series made some waves a couple years ago when they debuted, and they had this new grip knit material. And for those who have never tried on or seen a pair of the Phantoms in person before, grip knit is pretty much the stickiest material I have ever felt on a pair of football boots. And generally, I think that real innovation is pretty few and far between when it comes to changes in football boot models, because oftentimes when a brand promotes a new feature, it's usually more of a gimmick rather than an actual useful design change. But in all honesty, the grip knit that you find on the upper of the Phantom GX2 is really different from pretty much anything that's come before it. And obviously, when it comes down to getting curl on your shots and long balls, it's going to be 90 to 95% down to your technique. But I will say, having tested out the Phantom GX2s, you definitely get a slight added benefit from just how sticky that upper is. So for striking the ball, they're absolutely amazing, but I will note that for dribbling with them, especially when they're first out of the box, they are just so sticky that it is kind of easy to get the ball stuck under your feet. But that being said, you adjust to them pretty quickly. So if you're a free kick taker, or you just generally like the idea of a football boot with a more sticky and adhesive upper, the Phantom GX2 is going to be a cool one to look into. But I do just want to warn you guys that only the elite version of the Phantom GX2 is going to have that grip knit material. It's not going to be featured on any of the takedowns. Now, the takedown versions of the Phantoms are still great boots, but they're just not going to have the same sticky upper. And personally, I would recommend if you are going to get a pair of the Phantom GX2s, I would go with the artificial grass sole plate if you can find it. I think it's a much better, more well-rounded option than the really aggressive cyclone pattern that they have on the FG version. Next up, we're going over to the three stripes of Adidas, and we're starting with the Predator. Now, the Predator 24 that came out at the beginning of last year was an okay football boot, but I found that the upper on those boots was a little bit too thick, a little bit too stiff, and just too rigid on feet. But after the release of that boot, Adidas went back into the lab, and just a few months ago, they released the new Predator Elite. And since then, I've got the chance to review 3 different versions of the new Predator, starting with the Elite model, the Pro version I have here, as well as the League version. And across the board on all 3 models, the new Hybrid Touch upper that Adidas has in there is amazing. Now, personally, I would love to see a comeback of the Predator with a full leather upper, but in the meantime, I think that the new Hybrid Touch does the job. It has a really nice balance of softness while also still having a good amount of structure. And while I think the Hybrid Touch upper is the star of the show, of course, you're still going to get those iconic rubber strike skin elements on the instep of the boots. Now, when it comes to the new Predator series, unfortunately, I thought the takedown models were just okay. Personally, I think the heel area on both the Pro and especially the League version were a little bit half-baked. For some reason, on certain Adidas takedown models, they end up making the heel really shallow. I don't know why, but it definitely has a negative effect from a performance side. But I do have to emphasize that the new Predator Elite is an amazing football boot. The only real downside I can think of is that they did retail for $280 when I picked up a pair. That is a ton of money to spend on a new pair of football boots, so maybe if you are interested in the new Predators, I would wait a month or two and then see if one of the older colorways goes on sale. But if you're into the look of these boots and you've got the money to spend, I would go for it. Next up, let's talk about the F50. Now, Adidas has been into creating these throwback models of their boots recently, and if there is one that they really nailed above all others, it would have to be the F50. And what's cool about the release of the new F50 is that not only do you have the standard variation, but you also have a messy version that has its own distinct upper. And having tested both models, they both feel great. Now, the Fiber Touch upper on the standard F50 Elite is going to be the thinnest upper that Adidas sells. And that's part of what contributes to the F50 being the lightest boot that Adidas sells. And it's actually one of the lightest boots on the entire market. I think every player may have a slightly different idea in their head when they think of the term speed boot, but for me, when I hear speed boot, this is exactly the kind of boot I'm thinking of. And because the upper is so thin, you really do get a barefoot feel on the ball. You're gonna feel everything when you're dribbling, passing, and shooting with these boots. But by that same token, these boots aren't going to be for everyone. If you are a player who generally likes a boot with a little bit more padding or cushioning to it, these are not going to deliver that. But if you want lightweight football boots that are going to offer a ton of sensitivity, these are going to be the way to go. Now, when it comes to the messy variation of the F50, instead of the Fiber Touch upper, you're going to have a Hybrid Touch upper. And how the Hybrid Touch upper is implemented on the F50 Messy, it almost feels like a soft synthetic leather. It is going to be a little bit thicker than the upper on the standard variation, but it also has a little bit more softness to it. And then for what it's worth, the design of the tongue on the messy version is also going to be a little bit different. It's going to have a burrito style where one side of the tongue is attached to the upper and the other side is free. Whereas the tongue on the standard version is kind of this compression fit tunnel tongue that's kind of enclosed on all sides. If you want a thinner boot with more sensitivity, the standard F50 is probably going to be the way to go, but if you want a little bit more softness to the upper, then the messy version is probably going to be the best choice. And the most underrated thing about the F50 series is that all of the takedown versions in this line, so the Pro version and the League version, are amazing. In fact, I would argue that the $90 F50 League is probably the best budget football boot you can get. Next up, we're moving on to our first leather football boot with the Copa Pure 3. Now, the Copa Pure 3 Elite here is going to be, in my opinion, a big improvement over the Copa Pure 2 that came out last year. Because I paid about $260 for last year's release, and ultimately I ended up thinking that the leather on the Copa Pure 2 was just not quite as soft as I wanted it to be. But everything from the sole plate to the upper to the tongue has been redesigned with the new Copa Pure 3 Elite. And in seemingly just one iteration from the previous Copa Pure 2, Adidas have gone from one of the most rigid leather uppers I've tried on to one of the softest. I had a really great time playing in the Pure 3 Elite a couple weeks ago. I will say the only note if you're thinking about picking up a pair is that they do run really long. I got these in my standard size 10.5 US, and I just had a little bit too much room at the front of the boots. So if you are gonna pick up a pair, I'd recommend going about a half size down. Or better yet, you could check out the next boot on our list, which is the Copa Icon 2. Now, I don't know why, but it seems like the Copa Icon 2 is kind of flying under the radar compared to all the other big Adidas models. And I'm kind of shocked by that because I think that the Icon 2 may just be the best football boot that Adidas is currently making. And on top of that, they only retail for $180, making them almost $80 cheaper than their top end competition. Now, I heard some rumors that Adidas took some inspiration from Japanese companies when designing the Icon 2, and that would make a lot of sense because they do have a lot of similarities with some other companies like Mizuno and Asics. The calf leather upper in the Icon 2s is really soft and well stitched together at the toe box, but that's only one of the great features of these boots. The stock sole plate that they come with is extremely versatile and is going to be great on both FG and AG, and on top of that, the lockdown and performance are amazing. I also weighed the Icon 2s on my scale, and I literally think they're only about 10 to 20 grams heavier than the F50s, which is pretty insane for a leather football boot. There's always a ton of cool features to point to when it comes to new football boots, but at the end of the day, comfort is always going to be the #1 priority for me, and that's where the Icon 2s just excel so well. They are crazy comfortable. They are for sure the most slept on pair of Adidas boots right now. If you haven't tried them on yet, I definitely recommend it. And speaking of underrated football boots, let's talk about the Adler henzes. When it comes to leather football boots, the henzes are easily the most unique pair that I think I've ever tried on. Typically, when you get a new pair of leather boots, there's certain features and qualities that you expect. You think that they're going to be soft, plush, padded, and have that kind of natural feel to them. But that is not what you get with the Adlers. Instead, the leather upper that you get on the henzes here is razor thin on feet. And the way that the upper on these boots just wraps around your feet when you get them on for the first time is truly an amazing feeling. And also, we've got to take a moment just to discuss the craftsmanship of the upper here. I mean, look at how flowing and beautiful the design is on these boots. I know that some people may think that they're a little bit plain. I kind of get that, but I personally like the lack of branding that you see. But just all the stitching here, I mean, usually with most leather boots, you're gonna have some stitching across the toe box, but with the henzes here, it just continues all the way throughout the length of the boots. And the craftsmanship doesn't stop there. Not only are you gonna have beautiful stitching throughout the upper, but the sole plate is even going to be stitched around the perimeter here to the rest of the upper. And I have put these boots through a ton of abuse over the past year, and the upper as well as the sole plate have just held up so well. If you're a big fan of leather football boots and you haven't tried out Adler before, you're not going to regret it. They're about $160 US, which I think is a great deal, but if you do consider ordering a pair, just know that they do happen to run very long, so I would recommend going about a full size down. For reference, I'm a 10.5 US and I got a 9.5 US in these, and for me that fit was perfect. And finally, you knew we couldn't do a list talking about the best uppers without mentioning Mizuno. Now honestly, we could do this list and it could only have different models from Mizuno's line, but I decided to just include one, and it's one of my favorites, and it's the Neo 4 Beta. And this version I happen to have right here is the Elite version, which is not made in Japan, which is going to retail for about $160. And then the made in Japan version is going to set you back around $250 to $270. And when it comes to craftsmanship, especially throughout the upper on these boots, Mizuno just absolutely nails it. They've got three core elements happening throughout the upper here. You have this soft calf leather towards the toe box, then towards the sides of the boots, you have this razor thin synthetic, and then running through the center here, you're gonna have this soft, stretchy, elasticated knit material. I think it's pretty ambitious to pack all of those into one pair of boots, but Mizuno did an absolutely amazing job here. And what I really appreciate are the small details in that each of these elements is so well stitched to the next, and these boots just flow so well throughout the upper. And if you're taking any notes, I would say that the Morelia Neo 4 that I have right here was a pretty big inspiration behind the Copa Icon 2 from Adidas. And I go back and forth between the traditional Mizuno Morelia 2 and the Neo 4 Beta that I have here, and they're both so good it's hard to choose between one another. But in terms of uppers specifically, I just really like how Mizuno was able to fit all these different elements into this one boot. And guys, that is going to do it for this video. And please feel free to let me know in the comments below if you think there's any boot I missed out on this list. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.